The third and final session of the seminar, which is preparing policy papers for policymakers. Therefore, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmad Nazri Sulaiman to enlighten us on the topic. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. A very good morning. Okay, boleh dengar Can you all hear me? My name is Ahmad Nazri Sulaiman. I have served the government as a PTD officer for the past 33 years before I retired in 2017, about 5 years ago. I had experience working with different ministries, different departments, not only in education sector. I worked at MITI, primary industries, as well as Prime Minister's department. So during my attachment at different ministries, I mainly work on formulating policies as well as engaging at international conferences and meetings. So what I'm sharing with you all today is my experience in writing policies, as well as my experience in engaging senior officials, ministers, as well as other organizations, what you call stakeholders. I would like to say clearly at the beginning of this presentation that I'm solely relying on my experience. So this is not an academic presentation. That means I won't be quoting any reference or any books. It is solely on my experience. I hope I can, my process in sharing will benefit you all. It's good for you. If it's good, then you can pick up wherever is possible for you to adopt. If not, just ignore what I'm going to say. Through my experience, I've written many policy papers, memorandum for the cabinet, the government, the Jemaah Menteri for their consideration. And at the beginning of my presentation, I would like to inform you all that there are certain practices that need to be adopted by people who writing policy papers. It is not free writing. It is not kind of what you call, you can write whatever you think. You need to do a lot of research before you can produce a good paper. Good means accepted by the level of endorsing authorities. The first level is the officers, and then go to the head of department, and go to the Secretary General, then go to the Cabinet Secretariat for them to go through. If the Cabinet Secretariat agree that the paper has fulfilled all the conditions and subject to various what you call screening, then they will take up to the Cabinet for presentation. If not, they return it back to us. Please update and add more information on certain paragraph where they require more information for them to proceed at the next level. That means failure to prepare papers according to the set of practices will hinder the interest of the ministry in, bring up that proposal for endorsement and approval. Generally, even though we takes time to prepare papers, but in a meeting, the time taken by the presenters to get the decisions are normally not that long. Sometimes you work for a week or two or maybe months in preparing papers, but the presenting time or the one to present will be given only 10 minutes, maybe 2, 3 minutes. Especially cabinet papers, they won't allow, or they won't, the ministers will not be given long time to discuss. So in a very short period of time, decision has to be made. Normally, what we need to get endorsed is the agreement that the meeting agree about the proposal. So if we can say that the meeting agree with the proposals or the papers, that means we have a bigger chance that the paper will be discussed further or the paper will be adopted in the meeting or be considered for another level of discussions. The second consideration is the committee will then ask for the paper to be reviewed and further improved. That means they won't adopt the suggestion or the proposal, but they want the paper to be reviewed and also improved and will be presented again. That means the paper are still there in the minutes and will be placed in the agenda for the next meeting. Depends on time, probably not the following meeting, or maybe it will come again in the different time for the meeting. Then the worst case scenario, the paper will be rejected. Right from the beginning, the proposal is not possible, it's not accepted, then rejected, that means the end of the process. That is the general practices that being applied in getting approvals in the policy making and the government services or the structure in the government institutions. For today presentations, I will go through the set of what you call item that is listed in the agenda. But before that, I would like to have a short, brief session on why we are here. Based on the invitation by IPPTN and also my discussion with Professor Moshidi. So next slide. Yeah, next slide. Academic research in Malaysia context. Why we come to university or seeking the opinion of research based on the what you call experts from university, why we look for lecturers or experts to come up with research. As mentioned earlier during the this morning, that we formulate policy based on the real experience, on the people needs as well as the evidence-based research. So the best people who should be referred to are the lecturers because they are the subject matter experts. Depends on different field as well as different area of discipline. Maybe in social science, maybe in medical field, maybe in what you call economics or engineering, technical field. You are the experts in that field. As an administrator, we are experts in putting things on paper, but we might not be able to understand in detail the technical aspect of the discipline. For example, if we talk about health, probably the what you call the faculty of health, faculty of medicine, the people, professors in medicine are good in advising government. But there are also experts in the government sector where they are doctors working in the Perancangan or Planning Division at the Ministry that will consider proposals from professors from the medical faculty. So you are experts in the field. And furthermore, is your active participation in academia in social research. So you have a lot of research. We sometimes read your papers, your writing in journals as well, to see some new ideas that we can bring up to the management for them to consider. And the strength of academia. These are all experts. They have your own strength, your expertise, and your network. Since you're all in the academia, you have your own network. And the academia rich in methodologies. You have different methodologies, different what you call tools, as well as different schools, different ideas on how you can conduct research. So we want to know from the academia to provide us with the best and the good model for us to adopt. And academia free to voice their opinion, because the freedom of expression or freedom in academic allow you to give your ideas, whether it's acceptable or not. It depends on the one who listen to you. So these are the main criteria why we seek opinion or we want to get the cooperation from lecturers as well as academia on getting inputs before we can formulate good policies. But in doing that, this next slide, narrowing the gap. Because research product or research output do not sometimes give clear directions. So we at the ministry, or used to be at the ministry, I'm retired, but I used to be at the ministry, we need to read and understand the proposal research outcome and formulate a policy direction where we can pick and choose. Because we cannot adopt everything, since we have to consider so many other factors before we can craft a good policy. Another thing is we need to be able to provide clear and variety of options for the government to consider. It is not one and only proposal or suggestion. We have to bring up several options for the government to consider. Sometimes options are practical, sometimes are good on paper, sometimes options are, have so many implications. But we have to be clear and to set the priorities which are the suitable and practical options for the government to consider. And the following one, recommendation should be practical. Sometimes good recommendation, but not practical in the sense that it's acceptable, not only at the ministry, but also by other agencies. Treasury, for example, or EPU, the economic planning unit for the government, as well as central agency, JPA. You just cannot, as what you call the ministry's officers, you cannot just adopt and express whatever in the research output to be considered. You have to craft it and put it in a way that it is possible to implement the proposal. And then it must also draw a public participation. Positive responses are required in order to make the policy workable. If the policy that we want to introduce is something that will cause a lot of issues that bring up negative implication, then it might not be possible for us to introduce or implement that policy. So in other words, we have to go through a lot of process in ensuring the acceptance of the policy. And another aspect is to get the policy harmonized with the present or the current policies. For example, in education, we have so many stakeholders interested in education, so we just cannot introduce one new policy that might contradict to the policies that are being implemented at the MOE or other ministries. So the policy must be consistent, complement, as well as accepted by the current policies, and able to be supported by central agencies are mainly EPU, Treasury or Ministry of Finance, public JPA, Jabatan Perkhidmatan Awam, and another one is the legal office. Jabatan Peguam Negara. If the proposals contradict and the legal matters or laws, then it might not be possible for us to implement. This is the general overview on the what you call problem, not say problem, but the requirement for an officer to go through whenever we receive the final product of a research output from the researcher. So we have to craft and design the finding so that we can come up with a good proposal to the government for cabinet to consider. Sometimes the issues that interlink one or two sections from the discussion or from the findings, so we have to match them and bring them together, get them tied up and put up in a special phrases so that it's a kind of a policy statement that can be understood and be adopted and approved by cabinet or any other authorities that are required for the approval. Now I go through the process. This is sometimes what the at the moment the Ministry of Higher Education, they have the National Education Policy Research Fund, where normally lecturers would like to seek for their research. I will discuss about the strengthening and monitoring education policy, examining the current requirement, planning and future need. This part is merely telling you all about the process presently practiced in the Ministry of Higher Education. I'm not interviewed to make any what you call amendment or suggestion, because this is the practice that we have to follow. And I'm telling you so that you can understand the process. If you are like, let's say, if you like to apply or request any assistance in getting the fund, so you have to understand the process that are presently applied or being practiced. But the factors to consider for the next slide, please. The what you call the one that is interested in the research is not the researcher. The one that are interested with the research are the agencies, divisions in the department, institution, they are in the ministry. They are the one that will decide what kind of research that require for them to formulate a good new policy. Let's say you are interested to write up or do research on the language competency of the medical faculty students. They might not be interested in that. So if you say that you have a good proposal, yes, a good proposal, it's practical, but they might not be interested in that. So the idea that spark a research will come from these divisions, institution, department at the ministry, whether it is a Ministry of Education or Department of Higher Education or any agencies under the ministry. For example, EMGS, MQA, PTPTN, that kind of thing. So all the departments in it. If let's say the EMGS wanted to know or do research about establishing a new office in Brazil, for example, then they will discuss and let's do a research whether we should open up an office in Brazil to encourage more students from South America to come over to Malaysia. They will decide and they will get the right group of people to do research on them. So determining which division, department, institution will be the owner and in charge of the research proposal. That means they will be responsible for the research product. They will go through and carry through and get the approval based on the finding of that research. So the research proposal initiated by the research owner. Research owner are the institution, department or division in the ministry. It is not a researcher in the university or any other researchers in any other organizations. So once they identify and get the approval, next slide. So they will get the endorsement from the Ministry of Higher Education head of department meeting. There are several proposals that go to this meeting, and the ministry or head of department meeting will decide which one should be carried out. So let's say, for example, the one that I mentioned as an example, looking at language competency among the medical faculty graduates. So they will invite invitation to conduct research sent to various university and research institutions. So they will send what you call letters inviting researchers who are capable of or know how to conduct the research. So you can give up your propose your idea on how you can conduct that research. So request for proposal will be sent out, invitations to conduct research to various universities and research institutions, not only universities. For example, there are research institutions, other ministries will also be invited to participate in this research. If let's say about health, probably there are, or there is any institution in Ministry of Health that can conduct that research, so they can get the proposal from the institution concerned. Then the shortlisted research proposal will be called for presentation for them to go through. There are two meetings or committees, the Mohe Research and Fund Technical Committee and also Mohe Research Fund Steering Committee. Once they agree and endorse with amendment or no amendment accepted in totality, then an official letter will be issued with the term of reference of the research. So any researchers appointed to conduct research have to follow the what you call TOR and abide by the condition set in the TOR. And another condition is the research team must be registered as a consulting firm with the Ministry of Finance. This is the condition set by the Ministry of Finance for the appointment of perunding or consultant. So if you are not registered with your body or institution or office is not registered with MOF as perunding, then you cannot apply. Yeah, so you have to get registered. That means you have to be in any institution that is registered in Ministry of Finance. If the research involves other ministries, the research owner, that means the department, division, or any institution in the ministry, must agree to act as the parties responsible for the research outcome. It is not the researcher, it is the ministry, organization, or institution that are responsible. For example, if you want to do research about TVET, there are, as mentioned by Dr. Kwan, there are various institutions in the other ministries that are doing TVET. Education, we have human resource, we have youth and sports, we have agriculture, we have different ministries. So you have to, the department or division in the ministry that accepted the research product will have to make sure that they coordinate the outcome of that research to bring along all these departments so that the conclusion of that research or the proposal for the policy that they can draft later on will be agreed and accepted by all the stakeholders from different ministry. Next one. This is the main, just an outline of the one that being practiced right now. The duration of research, normally research period is 3 to 6 months. Any extension not exceeding 9 months must be authorized by Research Fund Steering Committee, the one that approved the research. And the payment will be made according to the schedule based on the submission of report. And then the next one is the next one. And the factors, the final report must be in Malay and English, research abstract, executive is the content, soft copy, Microsoft Word, and monograph. This is a technical, even though it's a small things, but failure to comply with this requirement will make the report rejected. You know, you have to really follow. They will read through and they will make amendment. They will edit. They will suggest and counter suggest. So it's quite a tedious process. And disciplinary action is if violated the conditions set in the TOR and also did not complete the research in a stipulated time frame. This disciplinary action depends on the nature of violations. Sometimes you will not be allowed to conduct any more research under the ministry. They will blacklist you or kind of thing. But I'm not sure, or I do not have any knowledge about the previous. But I know that there are some researchers who did not fully complete the research in time. And the final report belongs to the ministry and is not intended for public usage. Sometimes researchers wanted to use that research for publication, for what you call journal writing or that kind of thing. But in actual fact, that research product belong to the ministry, because that research supposed to help the ministry officials to formulate policy. That's the main purpose of that research. You know, it is not an academic research, it is a policy-oriented research, where from that research they can line out what are the possible options of suggestions that we can take up for the government to consider. So they will go through and they will formulate a policy statement based on the finding of the report. But sometimes the research are good product for us to share, especially for the postgraduate students. Special request has to be made to the ministry. If, for example, the process have completed, policy has been approved, and then the research product can or possibly can be shared. That depends on the nature of research. Some probably have certain level of secrecy, or what you call the data cannot be shared, that kind of thing. When I asked them about this status, they explained that the research are mainly used to guide them in formulating policies, and it's not intended for public usage. But they did inform me that there are requests from lecturers for them to publish the report as an academic exercise. Next one. Okay, this is the second part of my presentation. I have completed the first part. That means the process in getting the grant is being, just follow the process that I mentioned. This is the second part. What I want to talk about is the policy formulation process. Why we need policies? Sometimes, as mentioned by Dr. Guan earlier about the black shoes that need to be the minister decides the students can wear based on the experience that he when he visited stayed in the East Malaysia or Sabah and Sarawak. I'm not sure whether they did a thorough study before they come up with the statement, or maybe it is a statement made by a minister during a press conference. So whether that is a policy or guided policy is part of a question or opinion. He just mentioned, I will allow students in schools to wear black shoes starting from next year or whatever time. So whether that is a good policy, a guided policy. Why we need policies? I have listed here based on my experience and some reading. It is used to be a guide where sometimes ministries, department, agencies under the ministry are required to follow. For example, guidance in the getting approvals for financial spending kind of thing, you know. There's a policy, if you want to spend certain amount of money, you have to come back to the ministry. If it's less than that, you can get the endorsement of your head of department. That's a policy guidance. And then the policy on consistency, so that all universities or all institutions in the ministry have certain practices, consistency, promotionally bring up about the approval of the professors going overseas has to get the endorsement of the ministry officials. So consistency in applying some practices. Accountability, you know, this is the related to responsibility and accountability. We have policies on accountability, efficiency to create awareness and efficiency, clarity to further clarify or explain or bring up more what you call clear guidelines, uniformity to get a proper statement, understanding, and regulatory, establishing a regulatory body, and QA, for example, regulate policies on quality, differentiate policies with procedures. Some got confused while policies and what are procedures. So procedures are mainly guidelines on how it will be implemented, where policies can further develop a lot of procedures. General policies will allow some procedures to be, created. Build a strong culture and ethical values. We need policies so that there are awareness and open opportunity for further discussion. Clear policies and create clear action plan and procedures, and clear and open check and balance. There are process. This on the right is merely the process, whereas on the left are the reasons why we need policies. Because policy is a general word used. Sometimes this is the policy when you call the finance institution, oh, this is recently approved policy. You cannot make a withdrawal of certain amount of money. So policy are general word being used, but in the government sector, policies are the guide or the what you call the principles that manage the organizations and also the ethics or the workload or the culture, so that we are in the system together. For example, wearing batik on Thursday, it's a policy, but not necessarily everybody have to wear batik. It's an option, but this is a policy. People, our government encourage people to wear batik on Thursday. At one time, it was, sharp. It just don't encourage, but in certain department, they have to wear Malay, what you call baju Melayu on Friday. It's a policy of the department that you have to wear baju Melayu on Friday. That is the policy of that department, but not might not be policy for the government. So the next slides. Why we need to conduct research before introducing new policies? We need to address issues that require an action plan. Before we can come up with an action plan, we need to really go and study the issues. What are the important aspects that we want to consider? What are the areas that we want to improve? What are the weaknesses that we want to identify, as well as other reasons why we need to come up with a proper action plan, so that it will become an effective action plan. The second one is to ensure that action taken are well equipped to address issues comprehensively studied with evidence. Sometimes we need data to back up the policy. We just cannot write policies without any evidence. For example, you want to look at the B40 problem or a group of people, selected people, we need to have data. So we need to do comprehensive study on the number of people that will be affected by the new policy that will be introduced. And third one is to take into consideration the possible implications. Because policies of a ministry might what you call cross over to another ministry. So we have to consider the implications of the new policy will not be jeopardize the standing of the ministry. For example, if we were to look at the establishment of Aswara, a new university in the Ministry of Tourism, then the problem of identifying whether they can establish a university. A university comes under the purview of the Ministry of Higher Education, but they managed to get an approval to establish Aswara by offering a degree program. But when they want to get the support of PTPTN for funding, they have problem because under the PTPTN Act, only institution established under the AUKU or IPTS Act only can get that funding. So they cannot apply. So we have a problem. They need to do some changes to the policy. Take into consideration the possible implications. This is many factors. Ensure the policy harmonize with or complement with the existing macro policies. We have RMK12. This is the macro policy of the government, Rancangan Malaysia, 12 Malaysia plan. So every 5 years we have this plan. This is a macro planning for the country. So any new policies that we want to introduce, we have to check whether it is complement or harmonious with the Rancangan Malaysia ke-12. Every year, every plan has to follow the RMK, RMK 12. So if not, then it will become something new that will we will face difficulty in getting the endorsement of economic planning unit. If the economic planning unit does not endorse the proposal, then the treasury will not allow or will not approve any budget for that program. So the main proposal is that to make sure whatever we want to introduce, it must be in line with the macro policy of the government and avoid conflicting policy actions. You know, sometimes there are issues that are interesting for us to go through and do some. For example, right now we have so many ministries doing IR 4.0, but the ministry that is responsible is MITI, if not mistaken. So MITI has to see that whatever we are suggesting goes in line with the master plan under the master plan that they have introduced. So IR 4.0 under the custodian of MITI. So we must make sure that all these what you call stakeholders are being engaged as well as the consulted before we come up to the final policy statement. Why it is important to narrow the gap in the current policies and further improve the framework and guidelines of the action plan. Why we need research is transparent process by engaging with the stakeholders and also benchmarking with international standard law, regulation and practices. So through proper study, real case study will help us to formulate a good, practical, implementable, and effective policy. It's no point crafting a policy without proper inputs or data from the researcher or any group that we appoint to conduct that research. So guided policy normally will help us to win over the process in implementations as well as the process of engaging the stakeholders. The next slide, sir. Normally, at the end of the process, this is what I say is normally being practiced. At the end of the process, in the suggestion or proposal, we will come up with some recommendations. These are common recommendations: establishing an action plan, task force, or blueprint, establishing a committee or council, establishing a new regulatory authority, introducing new laws, amend the statute or guidelines and procedure, setting up a monitoring and evaluation or reporting mechanism or coordination committee, and last one, probably abolish, reduce, review the current practices. This is quite common when we come to the end of the research recommending this. But there are also recommending the recommendations for us to further conduct further research on certain matters where another set of data are required for us to consider. For example, if we want to talk about gender, we generally understand that gender, male, female, probably there are new kind of group that we need to further research. Yeah, whether we should have another category of the gender, but this is not an issue at the moment, but probably in academic or in schools, in institutions, there are sets of practices that will influence the decisions of the management. But it is quite common among lecturers or researchers from universities to propose for further second level of research so that the detailed part, because the preliminary or the first research will not focus on certain aspect, but they identify that that aspect is important for us to go into detail, or that research, the further research, to come up with a better proposal to the government to consider. So the phase 2 research probably need another team to, or experts to go into the detail. For example, in finance or in social studies, in law or regulations, regulatory authority, immigrations, collaborations, issues, as well as international students, where we require further studies to come up with what you call better suggestions to the government to formulate a complete, comprehensive policy. So recommendations are listed here are merely some of the common recommendations being proposed at the end of the process in engaging researchers or research product. The next slide, please. In the cabinet paper where we where we normally prepare, we have to list out the implications for the government or for the cabinet to consider. Political implication, for example, in international relations, if we make any statement, we make any stand, we reject any proposal, there are some political implications. So we have to clearly explain what are the political implications for them to consider whether they want to pursue the suggestions on implementing the policy, or whether they want to slow down and review the current practices. For example, in accepting immigrants, what you call refugees, we are at the moment we don't recognize refugees, but they are precious for us to recognize refugees and accept them as a group of people that need help. But so we have to review the political implication. We require the government to review the policies. But as mentioned by Dr. Miandi, in any multilateral cooperation, it is not legally binding. So we have to review based on the interests of other nations. and the implication on technology. For example, in digital divide, if we say that all universities should, or schools should extend their lifelong learning or use digital method in delivering lectures and sebagainya. So we have problem in the region where they do not have a proper technology or digital assistance. So we have to really understand the situation before we can come up with a good proposal on it. And then the legal matters, we have to balance or check through whether we have the right to implement certain things. For example, we want to introduce a new what you call a foreign language in a university as a subject, compulsory subject, or IPTS as a compulsory subject. Maybe you have to look at the legal matters, where legal requirement on the aspect, or bringing in students where the legal issues are related to the power of the immigration. We have to check with the immigrations whether we can implement some issues on the requirements that are under their authorities. Financial is a clear-cut case. We just cannot say that we need to establish a new institution. We have to consider whether the government are in a good financial situation to approve that. Social, environmental, and economic are clear-cut case about the implication. But all these aspects need to be explained in paragraph form for the approving authority to read through and understand. Because sometimes when the policy being approved, all these issues will be highlighted later. Then we have difficulty in seeing what you call coordinating the implications with different ministries and different authority. So next slide. This is the endorsement procedure. The different level of committee has a different function in approving the what you call the decisions whether a policy should be adopted and endorsed. Before we go into detail about this proposal, endorsement at the ministry, a Ministerial Function Act, where the Ministerial Function Act describes the responsibility of the ministers. This is the scope of responsibility for the ministers. So they work within the framework of this act. So a minister cannot just introduce something that is not within their punya ministerial function. So a set of rules have been laid out in the act. So this is your responsibility. For example, in training and education, there are certain ministries have special function in training, but education must go through the Ministry of Education and Higher Education. The word training can be adopted by other ministries, but the word education only solely comes under the purview of education and higher education. So as other matters within the minister's power in the Ministerial Function Act. So whenever we establish a new ministry, they have to come up with the list of authorities that will be the responsibility of the minister. And the second one that is generally accepted is approved by the cabinet meeting or parliament or ministers as head of department or any councils endorsed by the established under the government or the authorized committee. So depends on the level of the policy papers. So it will go through the set of meetings that are established under different hierarchy in the ministry. Some papers need not go to cabinet, some papers need not go to parliament, some papers are just being endorsed at the ministry for the approval, and the policy will be created for all the institutions in the ministry to adopt and apply. You know, but if all have to go to cabinet, then that means there is so many papers at cabinet and they don't have time to go through. For parliaments, maybe some issues which require new funding, new budget, new program. So they have to go to Parliament for endorsement, or else they will not get a new code for funds from the Ministry of Finance. Adoption of regulatory impact analysis. MPC is the Malaysian Productivity Corporation. They have come up with a regulatory set of practices that has to be followed. This is any new policies that we want to introduce, they have to follow these guidelines imposed by Malaysian Productivity Corporation. It merely explained that all policies cannot be approved, endorsed in the internal system. It has to be introduced or debated in the stakeholders engagement. So now when we want to introduce any new policy, it has to be openly debated, seeking opinion or feedback from stakeholders. So we just cannot introduce a new policy without engaging the stakeholders. So as mentioned by Dr. Guan, there are different level of stakeholders in different activities. Sometimes long lists that need to be gathered to discuss about the proposal. That's why some ministries have to organize different sessions at different levels in the stakeholder engagement and different region, so that the policy are thoroughly vetted by people and as well as by the interested parties. And when the policies being approved and endorsed, it will not have any more hiccup or so problem, because it will be considered as completely discussed or comprehensively viewed and commented by the stakeholders. And then to coordinate research policy discussion, if the policy falls under more than one ministry, for example, STEM, TVET, sports and youth, and etc. So Ministry of Higher Education, we have sports division, but the sports are mainly focusing on activities of sport that are in the universities. But if we want to discuss about sports for the public, then we have to go to the Ministry of Sports and Youth, because we cannot introduce policies encouraging sports openly, because our sports activity confined to the institution, confined to students at the university or students in the polytechnics or college community. We cannot organize national sports events without consulting the Ministry of Youth, because that is their forte. Or STEM. STEM, we have the Ministry of Science with special unit looking at STEMs. So we cannot say that STEMs education matters only. STEMs are also under the purview of Ministry of Education, Ministry of Science, and TVET. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many stakeholders, are people discussing about the STEM's TVET's agenda in training and the output of product. It's quite clear. Sometimes people discuss about the employability of graduates. They talk about skills. So when we talk about skills, it's concerning TVET. And also they have different qualifications. Whereas in the university, we give degrees or diplomas, whereas TVET, they have skill certificates at different level of competencies. They measure different things. So that one comes under the purview of Ministry of Human Resource. So they are the custodian of that skill the endorsement. So the next one, maybe, next one. Okay, in summary, I'm not sure whether cepat ya? Cepat siap. Okay. In summary, we need to understand the importance of policies and policy research, the initial and the approval process. That is the engaging researchers, where we require professionals research to conduct research in helping us to identify what are the right things to produce for us to uh, get the government to endorse a proper policy, a proper crafted policy that uh, uh, serve the interests of all sectors which are intended to serve or targeted in the policy. It is no point to introduce a policy that can cause chaos or further dispute and conflict in the government. So the government might face a problem if we introduce something that is not consistent with the aspiration of the nation or what you call keluarga Malaysia, that kind of thing. So we have to follow and making sure that the policy introduced are well equipped with the interests of all sectors. And then number two is need to consider matters and factors as well as endorsement procedure before starting research proposal and policy research. So this is the issues about process and procedure as mentioned in the earlier about the one that you have to go or fulfill before you can conduct a policy research with the Ministry of Higher Education. So I think I have come to the end of my presentation, but we have